Occult. I was last week I talked about the occult. What I gave a testimony, talked about the occult, what it is, the basic three elements of it, and how it can be very well disguised. And so that was sort of laying a groundwork for tonight, which is Wicca and witchcraft and neo-paganism. I would put them under the occult, but I also see that area as its own category because it has its own distinctives apart from what the outlook might be in certain occult practices. So I define the occult as a set of practices that are aligned with different beliefs. And certainly people in Wicca and witchcraft practice some of the occult practices such as divination and casting spells. So they are tied together very much. So this topic is really a big topic, Wicca and witchcraft. And I have a chapter on it in a book called World Cults and Religions, Volume 2. In case you're interested in that. I think it may also be on Kindle. So I have a chapter in there. That is the most extensively I have ever written on this topic. That is like a very in-depth history of it and what the ideas are, et cetera, et cetera. So I also have an article on my website at christiananswersforthenewage.org, which is probably a good basic overview. But tonight, hopefully I'll give you more information than that. So Wicca and witchcraft would come under the category of neo-paganism. Now, paganism, of course, pagan can be a very, very generic term where a lot of people use that word for different things. Sometimes it just means non-Christian. But I'm thinking of it in terms of a spiritual activity. So for example, in the Old Testament, when it talks about people who are worshiping other gods, who are polytheistic or who are worshiping Asherah, you know, the references to the Asherah pole, references to doing things under the trees or in the high places, a lot of that, which you're going to see in the Old Testament, especially like in First and Second Kings, when a lot of the kings of Israel were doing these kind of things, unfortunately, it'll refer to things like that. Now that's what I think of as a religious paganism in ancient, very ancient times. Neo-paganism is the revival or the attempted revival of ancient paganism. And it's a very, very broad category and it covers a lot of different groups. So you can have people in neo-paganism who are Druids, who believe they have revived or carried on the religion of Druidry, which you find mostly in the UK, although there are followers of Druidry here in the United States. So that's one element. And they have their own, you know, beliefs and practices, which are centered on trees and the sacredness of trees. They have their own way of doing things and seeing things. It's a little more structured, I think, from what I know about it, than Wicca and witchcraft, but it's there. That's one of the areas. Neo-paganism can also cover people who follow different goddesses. They're people who worship Diana. So they're Dianic. Basically, they're called the adjective Dianic would describe them. They follow follow practices in the worship of Diana. Then you have groups who follow Norse paganism. So this would be like people who follow Odin, the Norse god Odin. So you have Odinism and Asatru, which are both Norse neo-pagan groups. I've also read that those are interchangeable. I'm not sure if that's really true or not. The thing about this, when I'm talking about this, I want you to keep in mind that there is no like set out parameters here. So, you know, it depends a lot on who you're talking to as to what's what. So that's one thing that makes this area very difficult to talk about, because when I'm giving you are the overall basics as I know them, and as most people would agree, would probably agree with a lot of what I'm saying. But you're going to find a lot of variety, and you're going to find differences, and you're going to find people who disagree with some of the things I say and say that no, that's not true. Of course, they disagree with each other. So, there's no uniformity here. That's I think what I'm trying to say, uniformity. I do want to mention, in case you weren't here, didn't hear me last week, I had a lot of clients and friends who were Wiccans and witches when I was a professional astrologer. I was a new ager, but I was a professional astrologer, and I had a lot of clients who were Wiccans and Wiccans. I think I may have mentioned that last week. I'm not sure. So I wanted you to know that I have had a lot of contact that way. And in my ministry, since I became a Christian and started doing this ministry, I also have had a lot of exchanges, both in person and online, with people in Wicca and witchcraft or some kind of neo-pagan religion. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm not just getting this like from something I read. This is like something I lived as a person who knew these people, not as a Wiccan, but who knew these people and who has encountered them in ministry. So you have that group, the Norse group, Odinism, and then you just have a whole lot more. There are other groups out there. There are people who follow witchcraft of a certain country. So, for example, Italian witchcraft is called strega, and that is its own thing. There's Celtic witchcraft, which is the Celtic form, which is probably the most common one in this country. And you have people who follow, what they consider to be Germanic witchcraft or whatever. So it's just a lot there. Now Wicca and witchcraft specifically, in terms of how it exists now, first of all, this is not an ancient religion. Now, a lot of people who claim to be witches and Wiccans will say it's an ancient religion, but it's not. It's a modern religion. The practice of witchcraft, if you take the meaning of the word as the practice of the occult, certain occult practices, yes, that is ancient. But as a religion, it's not. Okay. So, I want to let you know that the way it's practiced now was never something that was done in ancient times. Now, worships of gods and goddesses, yes, that was in ancient times, but they didn't call it the religion of Wicca or witchcraft. So how did all this begin? Okay, it really began, the modern form of it began with a man named Gerald Gardner in the UK, in England. He studied a lot of different things. He was interested in the occult and in secret groups. And he actually joined some secret groups, including the Freemasons and some other groups. And then he claimed that he had been initiated into witchcraft by some witches who lived in the woods. And this was I forgot the name of the woods that he talks about, or he talked about where he met these witches. I think it was maybe somewhere near where he lived in England. And he claimed that he had been initiated into this ancient religion of witchcraft. And so now he was going to impart this information to people who were interested. And that was around the 1940s in England. And I think a book came out in 1950 about it. Now, later, it has been discovered much later that Gerald Gardner got some of this information from Margaret Murray, who was an Egyptologist and wrote a book, I think called, I don't know if she wrote The White Witch, I think she did, but I know there's a book called The White Witch that influenced Gerald Gardner, and Margaret Murray was behind it. Now, Margaret Murray's work and writings on witchcraft have all been discredited by modern archaeologists and modern historians. So her work is not valid, but Gerald Gardner used some of that, some of her work as part of what he taught. So you can see right away there's a problem because he's using invalid information and making invalid claims. No one knows if he was initiated by a group of witches. I myself doubt it, but this is because when you get into this area, you find that there are a lot of claims that are made that cannot be verified, or they've been debunked, or they're false. So this is kind of what you deal with when you deal with this area. Gerald Gardner also knew someone named Aleister Crowley. Now, some of you may have heard of him. I don't know. He was kind of a big figure, somewhat in the 60s and 70s, because he influenced a lot of musicians, rock musicians. I think the Beatles may have even put a picture of him on one of their albums. And Aleister Crowley is a very infamous, dramatic figure in history. He was born in he was born around the turn of the 20th century, but most of his life was in the first part of the 20th century. And he was a very, oh my gosh, what's the word? He was sort of, he was very out there about what he did and believed. Okay. And I'm putting it in a kind way. He was, he was infamous is the best word. He claimed that he was like the beast. Okay. He had been raised in a very, very strict Church of Brethren household, and he completely rebelled against it. He claimed he was the beast. He liked to kind of intimidate people with the idea that he had this power. He was not a Satanist. Now, if you read about him today, or if you go online especially, you'll find people saying Aleister Crowley was a Satanist. He was not a Satanist. He was a ritual magician. Okay, so that's something, unfortunately, that's there's a lot of false information out there. So be careful of what you see online, because information on the occult online can be very, very inaccurate. He was a ritual magician, and he was really into doing magic, into sorcery. And there was a woman who was with him for a while that he did sex magic with. And he was sort of known for that. He liked to shock people. Basically, he didn't mind having a kind of lifestyle that was very shocking and drew a lot of attention. And so that was Aleister Crowley. Now, Gerald Gardner met Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley had a motto, if you will, that he said came from his guide. He claimed to have a guide, which would be a spirit guide. And this motto was, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And there's even a book called that, about Aleister Crowley. So do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which means that your will reigns supreme. Your will should be overall. In other words, nobody has the right to put their will over your will. Your will is supreme. And you can use the power of your will to get what you want. Now, this idea and the saying from Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, was adopted by modern Satanism. And that's why a lot of people think Aleister Crowley was a Satanist when he wasn't. But modern Satanism, which if I have time, I'll try to talk about that a little bit later. It was founded by Anton LaVey in 1966 in San Francisco. A lot of websites that are run by Satanists or satanic groups will have do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. They'll have that written on there. And that's kind of like their motto. And they got that from Aleister Crowley. Now, what Gerald Gardner did was he took that and he slightly modified it so that it was do what thou will and do no harm. Okay, now sometimes it's worded, or you'll see it worded in different ways, but the main idea is do what you will, but do no harm. And that tends to be sort of an unofficial motto of people who follow Wicca and witchcraft. Not necessarily all of them. Again, everybody kind of does what they want. So, but that tends to be an idea that they all agree with. One of the problems with that to keep in mind is that they don't believe in absolutes. So if there are no absolutes, how do you determine when you're doing harm? Okay. I've asked that question actually of people in Wicca, and they really don't have a good answer. I've asked them, how do you know when you're doing harm? So they don't have any absolutes. There's no there's no boundaries really. So that's one of their mottos. Another motto that you might come across is whatever you do comes back to you 3 times. So the idea is that you only use your magic for good, because otherwise, if you use it for bad, that's going to come back to you. Now, there's kind of a loophole in that the idea of doing white magic or white witchcraft and dark magic or dark witchcraft has kind of fallen away somewhat and given way to this idea that when you are experienced enough and strong enough with your magical practice, you can do dark magic. You can do what is called dark magic, which actually is only going deeper with it. So there's this idea out there that doing dark magic is not necessarily bad. Of course, there is no such thing from a Christian point of view as white witchcraft, or, white witchcraft in the witchcraft world is supposed to be using your powers or using your magic for good. But you can't use magic for good, because using magic is something God has forbidden. Magic being things like casting spells, doing potions, trying to alter reality in some supernatural way, contact with supernatural forces, et cetera, summoning up powers from nature, from the gods, from spirits, from the dead, whatever you think you're summoning powers from, casting spells, of course. All of this is condemned by God, especially Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 and 11, but there are other passages that refer to these practices. There's practices in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, even Hosea. They're there. So there's no such thing as doing magic for good or doing spells for good. Now what do witches and Wiccans believe? Okay, and let me say something. There's 2 other things I need to say first. One is, I'm using 2 words here, and I'm kind of using them interchangeably, but they aren't really interchangeable to some people. A lot of people who are in Wicca say that people in witchcraft are not really practicing the ancient religion, or they're not really practicing witchcraft. And people in witchcraft often look down on people who are Wiccans, because they see Wicca as sort of a Johnny come lately thing. And they think Wicca is very, very superficial and kind of fluffy bunny sort of. So, a lot of witches tend to look down on Wiccans. So they don't always agree. And sometimes they will make distinctions from each other. Now, when I talk about them, Wicca definitely is aligned with Gerald Gardner. And witchcraft is something that kind of evolved from people who believe witchcraft is ancient, and they're practicing these different things that they get from different sources, but they aren't aligning themselves with Wicca or with what Gerald Gardner taught. He taught certain rites and rituals that had to be followed. And then it was later found that some of these were copied from the Freemason rituals, which I find kind of funny, but anyway, that's me. You have to find humor in this ministry, or because so much of it is so dark and terrible. So when you find humor, you take it. So anyway, so that's Wicca and witchcraft. The other thing I want to say, which is important to know, is that in the Bible, you have the word witchcraft, but it does not really exist in Hebrew. I think I said this last week. Do you remember, Devin, if I said it? Yeah, I did. I went over that, so I won't go over it again, but just keep that in mind. that it's referring to some occult practices when the Bible refers to it, and not to what we call the religion of witchcraft today. So what do a lot of them believe? They're very nature oriented. Nature is the role model for everything. So what happens in nature is okay. If it's something going on in nature and it's a natural thing, then it's good. Whether it seems bad or not, it's good because it's nature. So they believe that, and there are different beliefs about nature, about creation. Some believe that the earth is the goddess. So the earth itself is the goddess, and she is our mother. Some may not believe that completely, but they do believe that there are spirits in the plants, in everything, rocks, the plants, the water. Sometimes these spirits are called the elementals, and there's something called elemental magic, where you call on the powers of the elements or use the elements in your magic. So there's that aspect of it, but nature is very, very important. And because of that, they tend to like, if they can, to do things outdoors, to do rituals outdoors, to do things outside. Now, there are people practicing witchcraft in cities who, may hardly ever get somewhere out in the country. But ideally, the idea is to work with nature outside. Also, there's a reverence for nature and a reverence for the earth, and there's a reverence for, in most cases, not all cases, for women. Not so much because they're women, but for the female energy, for female power. That's why the goddess is so often prominent. And if the goddess has a consort, but the consort, the goddess is up here and the consort is down here. It's like, it's very unequal, but the goddess is it. And sometimes she's called the lady. So it's the lady, and he's called the Lord and the lady. So sometimes those terms will be used. A lot of Wiccans and witches will have altars in their home, and they may have representations of the Lord and the lady, the goddess and her consort. And then they'll have representations of the four elements: air, earth, water, fire, because those are the four elements, and those are tied to nature. There's also the pentagram, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, a 5-pointed star with the point up. You can have it two ways. You can have it with a point up, or you can have it with 2 points up and 1 point down. Now, most witches use it with 1 point up and the two points are down. And the 4 points, the 5 points, I'm sorry, are air, earth, water, fire, and the top point is spirit. Sometimes some may say the top point is the goddess. So that's another big part of Wicca and witchcraft. That's the pentagram, and using the pentagram is important in rituals, and using things from the earth is important. Calling on the earth is important. Because feminine power and female energy is so revered in Wicca and witchcraft, it has a very strong attraction for those who are drawn towards feminist ideas, towards feminism. And the reverence for the earth draws people who are environmentally oriented. So, we've been in a time where feminism has become more common. I mean, actually, I can remember when it was controversial, that the idea of feminism or focusing on women's issues, or even something very kind of low key, like focusing on women's issues or something, was considered kind of controversial. Now that's gone, and now the power of women to speak out, et cetera, is a big thing culturally and politically. And Wicca and witchcraft just have a built-in thing for that, because you are going to find that idea, feminist ideas, welcomed in Wicca and witchcraft. And you're going to find environmental ideas and reverence for the earth very, very welcome. That is a part of Wicca and witchcraft. So people who tend to really be drawn in one or both of those areas and feel very strongly about them may get interested in Wicca or witchcraft, because that is a way for them to kind of live it out, to maybe feel connected to the earth, to see the rituals as maybe just a way of connecting to nature. Because another point I should make is that even with the belief in the goddess and the god, or gods and goddesses, which is very common, some Wiccans and witches may see these gods and goddesses as symbolic energies, not as actual entities existing somewhere. They may see them as, in fact, it's probably more likely that they would see them as symbolic or as representing certain energies connected to the earth, or even representing energies within yourself. So there's different ways that these gods and goddesses can be viewed. They're not necessarily like maybe how the Greeks and Romans used to actually, have the statue of their god or goddess and go offer food to it and everything, and think that this god or goddess was listening to them. It's not, you might find that, but that's not really common. So there are people though who really think the goddess they'll talk about the goddess as very real and believe that she really exists. She might be the earth, she might not be, she might just be part of the earth, in the earth, connected to the earth. But they'll see her as very real. I had one woman I spent 45 minutes talking to, because I went into her shop where she sold a lot of witchcraft and occult books and items, and she had classes in there too. And she told me she was not a Wiccan or a witch, but she was a pagan who worshiped the goddess. So her main thing was the goddess. So I asked her if the goddess was personal or impersonal. And she thought about it for a minute, and then she said both. Because she said she could talk to the goddess or ask the goddess things, but the goddess was also this energy in the earth. Now, of course, it's illogical for the goddess or god to be both impersonal and personal. If you're impersonal, you can't be personal too. And if you're personal, you can't be impersonal. They're like contradictory. But in the world of Wicca and witchcraft, and in the world of New Age, contradictions can exist side by side. I know, because I had those ideas myself, not about the goddess, but I had other contradictory ideas that I was able to rationalize as making sense. So you can't expect a uniform, logical viewpoint or belief system. What you have is stuff all over the place, and it doesn't necessarily follow from step A to step B to step C. So when you're talking to people with these views, the most important thing to do is to ask them what they believe. Don't assume it, because there's no way for you to know. Even if they say, oh yeah, I'm Wiccan, that gives you an idea of some things, but you need to ask specifically, well, what do you believe? What do you think about, do you worship the goddess? Do you believe the earth is sacred? Why is the earth sacred? I don't know, if they're willing to talk, and often they are. I have found most people in Wicca and witchcraft very willing to share their spiritual beliefs, if you talk to them respectfully and just treat them as a person. I think it's really important as Christians to remember, if you're talking to anyone into these ideas, to see them as a person first, not as a Wiccan or as a witch, but as a person made in the image of God, who needs to hear the truth of Christ. So, like anybody who doesn't know Christ, they need the truth. So the best way to share truth with people, if they're willing to talk, is to ask them what they believe, why they believe it. I have asked questions like, what benefit, how does it benefit you? One time when I had an exhibit, and this is when I was a Christian, and I had an exhibit at a county fair in this area. It was a spiritual it was a Christian outreach basically, and I had 6 different symbols. And I had, one of them was the cross. All the rest were pagan symbols. I had the yin yang symbol, and I had the pentagram, and I had some other symbols there. I had the Hindu Om symbol. I had 6 of them. And somebody who follows witchcraft came up and started talking to me and told me she had gotten interested at age 12, and her mother, who was Jewish, got upset and threw away all her books, but then she went back to it and got more books. And she went on and on about how she'd been following this path for many years. At this point, she was at least in her, I'd say, mid or late 20s. And as she was talking so much that I actually didn't have a chance to say anything. So I was sitting there, I was listening to her, but praying for, an opening to say something. And she said, the path that we follow in witchcraft is not easy. It's very, very hard. It's very hard. We really work hard. And she kind of paused, and that, made the Holy Spirit gave me something to say. I said, so it's very hard. You've been on a hard path. And she said, yes. Yes, she really wanted me to know that. I said, I believe it. I totally believe it. And I said, that's what's so different from Christ, because Christ did all the hard stuff for us. Christ did all that on the cross so that we could be forgiven of all our sins. And he did everything, and we put our faith in him and rest in him. Now, I don't know how much of that got through. She listened to me. I could see that. I don't think anyone had ever told her anything like that before. From the look on her face, it looked like something she had never heard. And it took a few seconds. She kind of didn't say anything for a little bit. She was kind of taking it in. And then I think we talked a little bit more. I can't actually remember what happened after that, but I do remember that moment very vividly. And I learned from it, because I learned if you listen to the person, it will give you an idea of what you can say or what you can ask. So when she was talking about her path being very hard, what I thought of was, but with Christ, you don't have this hard path to get to heaven. It's eternal life through faith. And Jesus did all the hard stuff on the cross. This is a big contrast to something like Wicca and witchcraft. Another thing to bring out too, because they do believe in using powers. Now, often, here's something I should say. They don't always call their powers supernatural. They may say their powers are natural. They may say what they're doing is not supernatural. They're just working with natural powers of the earth, or natural powers that they have as a witch or whatever. So if that's what they think, fine. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't say, no, it's really supernatural. I mean, there would be silly to argue that. But I'm just letting you know they may say that. So, but what I like to point out is, if they're going to talk about powers or anything like that, is that Christ has power over all creation, over everything. I was saved while I was reading the account in Matthew 8, where Jesus rebukes the sea and the wind on the boat when the storm comes up and the disciples are scared, and he's asleep on the boat, and they wake him up. And he rebukes the sea and the wind. And then he says, well, where's your faith? Or ye of little faith, something like that. Because they still didn't completely understand who Jesus was. I mean, to stop a storm right dead in its tracks. I mean, that's just, only God can do that. So sometimes, you can go that route too, if they're talking about their powers or things they've done or seen. But most Wiccans and witches, like I say, are willing to have a conversation, and they're very looking at the time here. Okay. And they're very open about that. And they're very nice and friendly people. You know, like anybody else, you may find some Wiccans and witches who aren't very friendly or very nice. But in my experience, they're usually very down to earth. They're very friendly. They're nice. They feel charitable towards you. You know, if you're acting respectful towards them. So just keep that in mind. There's no reason to like be afraid of them or anything like that, or think of them as strange, as being weird or strange or anything, because usually that's far from it. I mean, I actually think there's stranger people in the New Age, because the New Age really has some of the ideas in the New Age are beyond the ideas that are in Wicca and witchcraft. In my opinion, I find a lot more far out stuff in the New Age than I do in Wicca and witchcraft. But of course, remember, they are being held by false beliefs in the spiritual power. So at the same time that you remember they're people made in the image of God, and to be respectful, and that they may have kindly feelings about, you know, things, they are in spiritual darkness, and they are in a dangerous spiritual darkness, because what they're doing, they are fooling around with supernatural powers, and this is demonic, and this can bring on demonic activity. And one of the things that many Wiccans and witches have told me, both before I was a Christian and since I was a Christian, is that they noticed a spirit or a shadow following them. Now, I've had them tell me this and ask for my advice, even as a Christian. They'll say the shadow, I know something's following me, the shadow's following me. I think they might say they think it's an evil spirit or something. So, and why is that? It's because of what they're doing. And if they ask me, I'll tell them. I'll say, well, I know what that is. I know it's because of what you're practicing. And you are dealing with the dark side of things. You're dealing with, you know, forces that are aligned with fallen angels. These are angels in rebellion against God. So that is why what you're seeing is probably one of your spirit guides. So I'm very frank in telling them what I think it is. Now, before I forget, I want to mention, I just did a program, recorded a program that I think is supposed to be released tonight, that you may want to watch on a podcast called Cultish, Cultish. They're on Facebook, but I'm sure they have other platforms. I did a program, we recorded a program last week on the TikTok generation of witches, because apparently witchcraft is a huge thing on TikTok. It's like a big, huge thing. I heard about this from some people several months ago. And then what we did on this program is they played clips, 30 seconds or 60-second little clips of videos from TikTok witches. And some of the things they said, often about Christianity, or saying that the miracles in Christianity are the same as doing a spell in witchcraft, which this is a common thing that you'll hear from witches. And then I give a response. So I think they did about maybe 5 of those videos or something. So that should air maybe tonight. I don't know. I think they said they would air it Tuesday night. I was just on Facebook before this, and it hadn't been put up yet, but it may be they do it like later in the evening. Anyway, you may be interested in that, because there's this article, and actually I sent it to Devin, and I put it up on my phone so I could read it, but so give me a second here. It's here it is. Okay. This kind of blew me away, that the hashtag witch talk has more than 19.8 billion views. Billion.
Crazy.
Okay. I can't even conceive of 1 billion. It has 19.8 billion views. And they start off talking about this one woman on there who they have her picture and everything. This is a USA Today article, and Devin can send it to you or whatever if you all want to see it. and I have another one to send you afterwards. I didn't get to send you that's related. She's 19 years old. She's on TikTok. She has 883,000 followers. Now, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't really know what the numbers of followers are like there. I don't know. Is that normal for people to have 800,000 followers? I'm not sure. If any of you guys know, let me know. It sounds like a lot to me. So she has 883,000 followers. Witch Talk has 19.8 billion views. And I think one reason this is so, and then they talk about several of the bisexual or non-binary gender people who are attracted to witchcraft. So I think actually that may be the other article. I can't remember, but it's either in this article or the other article. But it's kind of going through a revival now because it's been glamorized, because witchcraft actually used to be viewed as negative or scary or evil. And it's gradually lost that in the culture so that it's actually become glamorized. Now, it started to be accepted really with Harry Potter, in my opinion. That was one of my problems with Harry Potter. Sorry if you're a Harry Potter fan. I know people now, they're adults with children who read Harry Potter when they were younger. But anyway, I read all the books and I saw the movies, and I have articles on all the books and movies on my website if you're interested. I actually found actual occult practices in the book. It's a mixture of fantasy and occult, not so much practices as concepts. Sorry, that was my phone. I didn't turn the volume down. But there are concepts there. A couple of them are practices that are they're like real occult practices. I think that opened the door. And all right, I'm going to turn this down. I'm sorry while I do this. Forgive me.
Okay.
And let's see, what was I saying? See, I lost it.
I'm glad you're talking about the Harry Potter.
Yeah. Because people,
but I've always thought just like you on that. Like, it seems to, like, I've known pastors who sit down and read it with their kids, and it just seems like it could open the door for at least maybe some not great discernment.
Yes, it does. And it did, because I got emails I could tell they were from young, like they may have been even as young as 11 or 12, I don't know, 13, asking me, because of the question they asked, that's why I think they were young. They wanted to know if I knew of a school that was like Hogwarts. They're like, do you know of a witchcraft school like Hogwarts? Is there such a thing? Do you know where there is? If you know of one, can you tell me where it is? I mean, they would actually email me because they would see my website or see one of my articles and not really understand where I was coming from, apparently, or they wouldn't have asked me that question. Also, I know the Pagan Federation in the UK was besieged with requests for information, and they had to actually hire extra staff. And this was all because of Harry Potter. And Harry Potter opened the door for other publishers to do other similar books. And a lot of books came out after that were have very similar themes. And so the whole idea of casting spells to do something good, or using powers, supernatural powers, for something good was basically acceptable in Harry Potter. And that had an effect on the culture, along with other things that came out after that. So more and more books for young adults and children with these kind of themes came out. And then you had the whole Twilight series, which isn't witchcraft, but there's an element of the supernatural in there, of course. And vampires, which used to be seen as so dark, now they're, some of the vampires in the stories were put in a very sympathetic light. I read those books and saw those movies as well. I feel like I should get a medal for all these books and movies that I saw. My goodness, I spent so many hours reading these books because I take notes. I don't just read them. I take copious.
Your research.
Yeah, I take copious notes. And when I go to the movies, I'm taking notes in the dark in the movies. Really, I do. So anyway, because I want to be accurate. to be accurate in what I say. So you just have this whole thing now, this whole idea of witchcraft being evil is not even out there anymore. It's kind of like glamorous. And if you have these young women on TikTok and other places, and I've seen a lot of these articles where they're interviewing young, beautiful women. They actually happen to be beautiful. Not everybody in witchcraft is beautiful, but it just glamorizes it. So it has this appeal for young women and teenage girls, etc. There was a movie way back, like in 1996, I think, called The Craft, which was about 5 girls in a private school who were witches. And only one of them is really the good witch. And in the end, she uses her powers against the bad witches. This movie, which was sort of this underground hit, I mean, it was not a hit per se as a regular movie, influenced a lot of teenagers into witchcraft. So the media, whether it's movies, books, or now we have social media, TikTok and other things, has incredible influence in getting people interested in these things. And so that's, it's that, I think that's helped it. It's helped glamorize it. It's helped it. I guess it seems interesting or fascinating to people. I think I should go ahead and take questions. I think I've been talking enough.
Okay.
So I don't know. I hope they're questions because I like to answer questions.
Yeah, no, that's very, very informative. So I know we probably have some questions maybe coming up.
I was curious, so I have several friends who are interested in.
She might not be able to hear you. You may want to.
Yeah. I won't be able to hear. They can come up and talk there or whatever.
Nice and loud.
I was curious. I have a couple of friends who are either Wiccan or practice witchcraft. I can't remember which one. And one of my friends is just interested in kind of gathering information. She doesn't hold to many of the beliefs, but she just kind of.
Okay, I just lost her voice there.
Sorry.
I know you said you have a couple of friends into Wiccan witchcraft, and then one of your friends, and then it kind of, your voice sort of faded. I'm sorry.
Sorry. And one of my friends is really interested in learning about things, but she doesn't commit to anything, and I'm kind of wondering how to best reach out to her.
Okay. And she's not a Christian, right?
No, she knows a little bit about it, and she grew up in the church, and she's got negative connotations with it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Good question. Yeah. And that's true for a lot of people that turn to witchcraft. They often have a background in a church or in Christianity or what they think is Christianity. And they have negative experiences or develop negative ideas about it for whatever reason. And that pushes them away from it towards witchcraft, which witchcraft is very welcoming. So I don't know. I think I would ask her, she's a friend, so I assume that you can have conversations with her and ask her questions. I would ask her, first of all, maybe you can say, well, since you grew up exposed to Christianity, first of all, I want to know if you know what Christianity is. Because a lot of times they don't know what it is. They think it's a set of rules to follow. They think you have to be good, or you're following some kind of moralism. So well, there's 2 avenues you go. That's one avenue where you could explore ideas. She may have a totally wrong ideas about what Christianity is. And the other avenue would be to ask her, if you haven't, tell me what makes you interested in this area. What makes you interested in witchcraft? What is appealing to you? Why do you think that it's something that you would actually want to spend your time doing? Or would that be your belief? Would that actually become your religion? I think just asking her probing questions about why this is appealing to her, why is she doing it? What does she get from it? How do you think it's going to benefit you? I think by listening to her, it might give you some ideas of what to say, because one of the things you can point out to her is that on the surface, it may sound very appealing. It's about the earth, it's about nature, you know, it's the power, the feminist power, goddess power. And so women, you know, think that they will be empowered in witchcraft. They're looking for empowerment and identity. So you can say it seems that way, but that's really a facade, because it's like looking at a beautiful flower and then you look at the root, and the root is in rotten soil, because the soil of Wicca and witchcraft is just dark. It's dark. It's has nothing in it that's love from God. It doesn't have an answer to what happens when we die. Witches have different ideas about what happened. They don't, you know, some of them think you go to this place called Summerland, which I think comes from Norse paganism. So it's like this beautiful place that you go. So they don't have real clear concepts on that. So that's another thing you could ask her about. You could say, well, I'm interested. If you're interested in witchcraft, tell me what they think about death. Where do you go? Now, if she's into New Age stuff too, she may believe in reincarnation, and then you have to go in a different direction. With reincarnation, I'll just throw this in because I don't think I said it last week, and I have an article on it on my website. I always ask, how many lives are you going to have to live before you don't come back anymore? And who decides when you don't come back anymore? And where will you go? And what will you be? Because there aren't any good answers for that. Absolutely none. Nobody really has an answer. They have what they think it might be or what they've heard. So that's another way to go with that, huh?
Yeah, it just seems like with the whole reincarnation thing, there's no way to falsify it. There's no way to really, how do you, you know, it's one of those things.
Yes.
You can say it, but it's like you can't, you can never really prove it wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't disprove it. I've had people ask me, well, I have a friend who believes in reincarnation. How do I prove it's not true? Well, it doesn't exist. That's very hard to prove it's not true.
Right. Yeah.
So I take, there are other, approaches that you take with that. Of course, nobody's proved it's true either. And all these stories about people supposedly remembering their past lives, nothing has really been verified. And there's other explanations for that. But I don't want to get too off track into that. I hope I answered the young lady's questions. I don't ask her if that helped.
Yeah, she said it did.
Okay. And you can email me if you have more questions, like after you start talking to her. What was her name, the young lady who asked the question?
Emily.
Emily, you can email me, the ex-astrologer at gmail.com, and ask if you have questions as you talk to your friend.
Yeah. And if you guys want, I can give you direct access to Marcia. So, any other questions? Yes. Nice and loud.
Hi. Hi.
So like my question was, I'm pretty sure you talked about this last session, but with horoscopes, is horoscopes like a part of witchcraft? Because I know a lot of Christians that participate in it. So I would just kind of get like a little insight on that.
Okay, like reading your horoscope, you mean? In the paper? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, like far as like the birth star, and everyone's talking about like the say again? Yes.
Zodiac.
Oh, their zodiac sign. Like I'm a Gemini or I'm a Libra, that kind of thing. That is part of astrology. Now there are witches who are into astrology, and they usually are very favorable towards it. Witches will practice occult things like astrology, tarot card reading, things like that. But astrology actually is separate as a practice. It is probably the oldest occult practice that we know of. And it has to do with believing that the position of the planets and the sun and the moon have a meaning. So if you're born when the sun is in Gemini and you believe in astrology or horoscopes, then you think, I'm a Gemini, and that really fits me. So that kind of thinking is astrology. I was an astrologer, so this is something I actually could do a whole talk on astrology sometime. Did I ever do that, Devin?
I don't think we have. That would be awesome.
Okay. Okay, I could do that sometime if you want, because I could talk a whole, no problem talking there on that. So now here's a problem with Christians doing this. And I've pointed this out to them. I say, do you understand that the worldview that's behind that is a pagan worldview? It's, first of all, it's false, okay? Because when we look at where the position of the sun and moon and everything else is, we're measuring it from a certain point on Earth, and it's being measured against a fixed, it's called the zodiac belt around the Earth. And that has shifted over since astrology was first practiced, and this all came like when they said the sun is here, it's in Gemini, etc. All that has shifted about 20 degrees. So actually, a lot of people who think they're Gemini actually might be the sign before it. And people who think they're Virgo might actually be Leo. So people think they're Gemini might be Cancer. In other words, it's not accurate anymore. But besides that, I would say to a Christian, do you really think that where the sun was at the time of your birth has some kind of meaning in your life? Because that is not a Christian worldview. That is, it's a pagan worldview. It's like believing that the planet has some kind of meaning in your life or influence on you. So it's completely, astrology is completely contrary to it's actually anti-Christian. It's anti-Christian because it tries to give you an identity outside of Christ based on nature, based on creation. And God tells us not to look to creation for meaning, but to look to the Creator. So looking at astrology, it's like if you know Romans 1, read Romans 1, verse 18 tonight, 18 and the rest of the chapter, it'll say that God revealed his attributes through creation. Now, what that means is we can see there's a creator. Through creation, we know there has to be a creator. But then God says, but man suppressed this truth in unrighteousness and turned from the creator to the creation and started worshiping four-footed animals and beasts and creatures. So basically what God is talking about there through Paul, who wrote Romans, is that when man turns from the creator and turns to creation for meaning, he starts worshiping creation. And astrology is a form of worshiping creation. And in fact, in the Bible, astrology is often depicted as bowing down to the sun and the moon. This is, yeah, they believed in the sun and moon gods, but that was also part of astrology. And that's where it comes from. It comes from belief that the planets, which of course they thought were stars, they didn't know what planets were then. They thought the sun and moon and planets were the homes of gods, or they were gods. They were actual gods. So thinking you're getting a meaning from, where the sun is and from a zodiac sign, you're looking at creation instead of the creator. So that's really what's going on. If you feel like you can be that frank with the Christians that who do this, I don't know if you feel, can you be that? Do you think you can be that frank with them? I don't know.
We can attempt.
You could just say, and in a nice way, not a condemning way. Do you understand that when you're looking at astrology, that's astrology, and that is looking to creation and not the creator? I mean, see, I have no problem saying that to people, but I'm kind of bold because I used to be an astrologer. So anyway, I have an article on horoscopes on my website and on astrology, a couple articles on astrology, but you email me too if you want me to say more.
I actually have another question as well.
Okay.
I have a friend that actually goes to see a psychic.
Oh, wow.
You know,
Is she, does this friend claim to be a Christian?
he is not a Christian, no. But like I've shared my faith with a few people that I know. I've shared my faith with a few of them, and their answer to me has always been like they have prayed, they did believe at one point, but they just felt like their prayers weren't heard. They just felt like Christianity
Yeah.
didn't for them, and when they have participated in these activities, they've actually seen results versus them being a Christian and not seeing anything.
Yep. Yep. That's a very common story. Very common. They see results, they get good advice. Here's the thing. I would point, if you feel you can say this, all psychics, all people who are being true psychics have spirit guides. Spirit guides are fallen angels. I can't remember if I talked about that in my testimony last week, but I had spirit guides. They're fallen angels. They can give information to the psychic about that person. So if your friend is there and asking about something in his, is this a guy or a girl?
Girl,
A girl, or a young woman? If
Yep.
she's asking about something and the psychic says, oh, I know that you applied for that job at the bookstore and you're not going to get it, but you're going to get an offer to work at this restaurant, you know, and it'll be a really good job. And then let's say that happens, then she's going to believe the psychic, but the psychic has spirit guides who are giving information. Now, demons don't know what's going to happen in the future, but they can know things that are going on behind the scenes. Maybe they know, maybe she's applied to this restaurant and somebody at the restaurant said, yes, we're going to hire, we're going to hire Cheryl. And so, and the bookstore owner's like, no, we're not going to hire her. And the demons know this and they pass this on to the psychic. Most of the time when psychics give information, they're not talking about the future unless they talk about it in more general terms, or they talk about it in terms of something like, well, you're going to have a big change in your relationship with your boyfriend, or you're going to have a big change in your relationship with your coworker or with your professor or whatever. Well, the chances for that happening are pretty good, because usually things change over time. So something will change and the person will be like, wow, the psychic told me that there was going to be a big change, but usually they're giving advice and they're talking about the person's past or maybe some kind of influence on them right now. And this kind of information is not a secret to fallen angels, because angels, although they can only be in one place at a time, they can go to a lot of places very fast. They don't have to get on a bus or something. They're just, it's not hard for them to go from the restaurant to where the psychic is doing the reading and saying, oh, I know Cheryl's going to get offered that job. So what I would do, you don't want to say all that, that's too complicated, but you can say, do you know that all psychics have spirit guides? And see what your friend says. Your friend might say, well, what's a spirit guide? And then you can say, well, they're fallen angels. And then they might say, well, what's a fallen? I don't know, maybe if they have a background in church, they'll know what that means. That's what there's all psychics, astrologers, and anybody practicing in the New Age and in the occult and witchcraft, Wicca have spirit guides. And most of them are aware of it. So also I would say to this person, you seem to be getting results or getting advice that's helpful, but there's a cost for it down the road. You pay a spiritual cost for this advice, because this advice is meant to lead you away from God. And it will lead the person away from God, and it will open doors for that person that take them even further away from God. That's exactly how it works. It's how it worked in my life. And I've seen it work in other people's, including Christians. When Christians start, they get desperate for answers. I talked to one woman who got desperate. She started going to an astrologer and she was getting all this information. It was either, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's astrologer or psychic. It was one or the other. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of the same thing. She was getting all this information and she told me, well, it was helpful. But then all these things started happening to her. Like she got on a bus and this man came up to her and he said, do you want me to tell you your future? And it kind of freaked her out because he just picked her out of everybody else. I said, that's because you're going to this psychic. You are you're like saying, hey, here I am. I'm ready for advice from the fallen angels. Send your people to me. Because, and you will start encountering people who are into this stuff, and they will slowly, it's a seduction. They'll seduce you. It's a seduction. You can tell her that. Tell her it's a seduction. It's like being seduced, but you're being seduced by fallen angels. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, good, sure.
Come on, yeah, you guys, and if you have more questions, please feel free to come up. Anybody got questions? Come on up. Now's the time.
I've got a couple of questions now.
Okay. Emily, right?
Yeah, Emily. And thank you. I think I probably will email you as well. But how did you find out that spiritual guides are fallen angels?
Well, because we know from the Bible that there's human beings and there's animals, and the only other creatures with intelligence are angels. They're the only other creatures mentioned with intelligence. And we know that Satan is a fallen angel. He's an angel who rebelled. And we know that he took 1/3 of the angels with him. That's usually how a passage in Revelation is interpreted. I can't remember. I always forget exactly where it is, but it's in Revelation.
The third is fell from the sky.
Yeah, it says the tail swept 1/3 of the stars, because sometimes stars refer to angels. Most people think that's a reference. So we know that, and of course we know Jesus cast out unclean spirits and evil spirits. Well, those are fallen angels. Those are demons, because angels are called spirits. So there's nothing else they can be. They aren't human. So they're angels, but they're serving Satan, not God.
Yeah, thank you. And then my friend is very into tarot cards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she says that her friend has a spirit guide, and she kind of has a spirit guide. She says that she has it's like an extension of herself or something, and I'm not quite sure how to.
Yeah, there's something like that. There's that idea of an extension of yourself, and it might be like your higher self, or just, there's also this idea called a thought form, that you can create a thought form, which is like an extension of yourself. That's what the conjuring of the Patronus is in Harry Potter.
Oh,
That's one of the practices. When I read that, I knew exactly what she was talking about. I'm like, I can't believe it. This is the conjuring of a thought form. And also the animal also falls in the category of an animal spirit guide, because that exists in some of Native American religions and in some parts of the occult. So you have an animal guide who's a spirit guide. I would ask her, how did this extension of herself, or whatever she calls it, where does it coming from, and why does it know more than she does? I would ask her that.
That's a good question.
And see what she says. And then I would say, well, don't you think God knows more than this extension of yourself? or the guide that the psychic has, or tarot card reader has. God knows more. This why get this information from these guides?
That's a good point. I'll ask that. And then just one last question.
Okay.
So when or if she practices, like tarot readings and stuff around me, I'm not usually too worried, because I am a Christian, and I've evaluated my faith. It's not just like, yes,
Yeah,
kind of superficial. And so I believe that the God's Holy Spirit is inside me, and so I don't really fear possession or anything. But I know that it's not smart to mess around with demons,
right.
and they can harm the physical body. So do you have any thoughts on that?
On what? On having her do a reading for you, or being with her when she's doing a reading, or just being with her?
Yeah, being around her, or if she asks me to, or
If she asks you if you want a reading, is that what you're asking? Oh yeah, no, definitely. You have to say no. it's not because it could hurt you, although Satan could try to use it to confuse you.
Mhm.
It's because by letting her do it, it's like an endorsement. It gives her the idea that, oh, okay, well, if she's letting me do this, then she's not really that against it.
Mhm.
You see? So if somebody offered to do that to me, somebody I knew, I'd say, no, you know that I can't. I cannot allow myself to have you do a reading for me because number one, I know that that's opposed to God. And number two, I don't believe it's going to help me.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Good questions. Bye.
Bye.
Any other questions? All right, well, I think we've gone past our time limit.
We sure did. Yeah, well, that was good. There were some good questions there. So
I'm curious, how many people would like to hear Marcia do a talk on astrology? So pretty much every hand just went up.
oh, good.
And what are
Great.
you doing next Tuesday?
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Oh, you're serious. Let me look at my
you're-
calendar.
Yeah, if you're able, I
Hey,
think,
you don't waste any time, Devin.
I didn't think that was your, like what you did, right? You were
I
in a-
know. Yes, I was a professional
don't know why I didn't ask
astrologer.
you a talk on that before.
Okay, that would be the 9th of November, correct?
Yep,
Yes, I could do it.
wonderful.
I have two things in the day,
Okay,
but one's in the morning and one I can do anytime in the afternoon. So I could put that down right now.
okay, wonderful. And yeah, we'll go ahead and mark you down for that. And
Okay.
I can't tell you guys the questions you guys ask, such thoughtful questions. I love hearing that, and man, that just energizes me. So
Me too. Me too.
yeah, I mean, fantastic, Marcia. Really appreciate your a wealth
Sure.
of information. And so if it's good with you, we'll have you back next week.
Great. And that can, what I told about the horoscope and everything there, I can go into that more.
Wonderful, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I guess we'll go ahead and end the recording now. I'll let Nicole.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you. Thanks, everybody. Enjoyed it.
you, Marcia.
Good night.
Good night.